Measles outbreaks across the country have many of us wondering about our immunisation status, particularly if we were born last century. Professor Robert Booy is head of the clinical research team at the National Centre for Immunisation Research and Surveillance. He joins me now to let us know how to be sure we're up to date with our own and our children's shots. Professor Booy, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
And before we get to that, it's April now. The number of cases in the US, they're saying, is approaching the record for the decade. What's the situation here in Australia?
Well, here in Australia, we're getting imported cases, people who are going overseas with non-immune children or non-immune adults, and they're catching influenza in the Philippines, in Thailand, in the US, in the UK, in Eastern Europe. So there's a lot of places in the Northern Hemisphere where you can catch it. And if you're not immune, you can bring it back, and then you can have chains of transmission here in Australia. Because we've got a high level of immunity here, we can cut off those chains of transmission within 2 or 3, at most 4. But we do need to pay attention to cases coming here, and we need to follow them up.
And what are the reasons for the outbreaks that are happening?
Well, measles is just so infectious. If you went into a room with 10 people who were susceptible, you would probably infect 9 of them. That's how incredibly able it is to transmit from one person to another. And it goes through respiratory droplets and even through touch and through hand approaches.
Gotcha. And most people in Australia are immunised, as you said, and that's either through they've actually had contact with measles in their life or with a vaccine. So with that in mind, would anyone benefit from a booster?
Oh, absolutely. If you had the measles infection, the wild infection, you almost certainly had it before 1966 as a date of birth. So someone in their 50s, like me, will have had measles as a child and get lifelong immunity. But if you were born in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, you may only have had 1 dose of vaccine. Now that provides some protection, but a second dose provides long-term protection. So there's a lot of people born in the 70s, 80s, early 90s who should consider getting a booster dose, especially if they're going overseas.
And is there any suggestion that our immunisation rates are down on what they have been?
Oh, we've done really well in the last few years. In children under 5, we're getting up to 95% uptake of 2 doses of measles as part of MMR, measles, mumps, rubella. So we're doing really well, but we can do better. And that's why people should look at their immunisation records, they should talk to their GP, and especially if they're travelling, they should look after themselves and think about getting a second dose if they've only ever had 1.
And babies get their first at 12 months if they're on their schedule. Are they able to get it sooner if they were to go travelling? Absolutely.
People going to Asia, especially the Philippines, can have a initial dose from 9 months of age. The immunity you get from your mother through the placenta can protect you for some months, 6 months, maybe 9. But from 9 months of age, there's some evidence that you can be vaccinated and get good protection by a vaccine that otherwise you wouldn't have until 12 months of age. And so we've been looking for a long time at whether we can give the vaccine earlier, but certainly if you're travelling, get it at 9 months or between 9 and 12 months.
And before I let you go, is there any evidence that in light of these measles outbreaks, anti-vaxxers are perhaps changing their minds?
Oh, I think some of them are. We've looked at the issue in the US that people have said, oh, we don't want to have this vaccine. What happens is that if you deny your child a measles vaccine in infancy, in their primary school years, what can happen is if you catch measles as a young adult, you can get it much more severely. So people are thinking about that and they're saying, I need to be vaccinated earlier to prevent the serious consequences of measles.
Professor Robert Booy, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.